The moment Melissa looked me in the eye and said, "Savannah, you're too old to even remember what you're doing," I felt something inside
Given
me
the
crack.
circumstances,
But
I don't
that
see a
wasn't the
path
worst
forward
part.
for your involvement
The
in this
worst part
project.
was when she smiled
The numbers
and
just don't
calmly
support
told
it.
everyone she had already deleted every single financial record I had spent 30 years building. "Just clutter," she said. 30 years of my life gone with one click. Everyone turned to look at me like I was confused, like I had imagined it all. But I knew something they didn't. Those records weren't just numbers. They were proof. And Melissa had just destroyed the only thing standing between her and the truth. If you've ever felt dismissed, overlooked, or made to doubt your own mind, I want you to stay with me on this story. And before we go further, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? Don't forget to like and subscribe, because what happened next still keeps me awake at night. If there is one thing I have always trusted in my life, it is numbers. People can lie. Memories can blur. Even love, well, love can change in ways you never expect. But numbers don't lie. They sit quietly on paper, waiting for someone patient enough to read them correctly. My name is Savannah Waverly, and for most of my life, I was the one people relied on when things needed to make sense. After my husband Charles passed away 15 years ago, everything in our world could have easily fallen apart. He had been the face of our small but steady family business, a regional supply company we built from nothing in Columbus, Ohio. But behind the scenes, I had always been the one managing the books, tracking expenses, balancing accounts, and making sure nothing slipped through the cracks. When he died, people expected me to sell everything, to simplify, to take it easy, but I didn't, because I knew something they didn't. The business wasn't just numbers on paper. It was the structure that held our family together. And if I let that go, I wasn't just losing income. I was losing control. So I stayed. I kept every ledger, every invoice, every tax return. I built a system so detailed that even years later, I could tell you exactly where a dollar had gone and why. There were labeled binders in my study stacked neatly in chronological order. Digital backups stored on my computer, organized by year, by category, by account. Everything had a place. Everything had a reason. And for years, that system protected us. It kept our finances stable through market dips, unexpected repairs. Even Ethan's college years, when tuition seemed to climb higher every semester. It gave me peace of mind in a world that had taken too much from me already. Ethan used to admire that about me. When he was younger, he would sit at the kitchen table while I worked, watching me go through receipts and statements. "How do you remember all this?" Mom had asked. And I would smile and tell him, "I don't remember everything. I just know where to find it." Back then, he trusted me. Back then, things were simple. But life has a way of shifting quietly before you even notice it. The first time I felt something was off, it wasn't dramatic. There was no argument, no confrontation, just a number that didn't sit right with me. It was a routine monthly review, something I had done thousands of times before. I was going through the family account statements, checking the outgoing payments, making sure everything aligned with our usual expenses. And then I saw it. A transfer. Large, clean, almost too clean. It wasn't labeled in the way I would have expected. No detailed memo, no corresponding invoice in the files I had. Just a simple note, investment allocation. I remember staring at the screen longer than I should have, because something about it didn't feel right. We had investments, of course. Safe ones, predictable ones, nothing risky. That had always been my rule after Charles passed. We didn't gamble with what we couldn't afford to lose. So where had this come from? At first, I assumed I had simply missed something, that maybe Ethan had made a decision I hadn't been informed about yet. He was older now, after all. married, building his own life. It would have been natural for him to take more initiative. Still, I printed the statement and placed it on my desk. I told myself I would ask him about it later. But then a week passed, then another, and somehow the conversation never happened. Looking back now, I realize that was my first mistake, because that one transfer wasn't a loan. Over the next few months, I began to notice more of them. Different amounts, different dates, always labeled in vague, almost careless ways. Consulting, because that one transfer wasn't a loan. Over the next few months, I began to notice more of them. Different amounts, different dates, always labeled in vague, almost careless ways. Consulting, expansion, external services, words that sounded official but meant nothing without context. I started keeping a separate folder, not part of my main system, just a small stack of papers tucked into the bottom drawer of my desk. At the time, I didn't even know why I was doing it. Instinct, maybe, or something deeper, something quieter. The part of me that had spent decades protecting this family, even when no one was asking me to. I didn't confront Ethan right away. Not because I was afraid of the answer, but because I was afraid of what the question might do. You see, when you've spent your entire life being the steady one, the reliable one, the last thing you want is to be the reason everything starts to unravel. And I could already feel the tension building in ways I couldn't explain, especially after Melissa came into the picture. At first, I tried to tell myself that the timing was a coincidence, that the changes in the accounts had nothing to do with her. But the more I thought about it, the harder it became to ignore. Because Melissa had opinions, strong ones, about everything, especially about how I managed things. She never said it outright, not in the beginning, but there were little comments, small remarks wrapped in polite smiles. You still keep paper copies of everything. That's very traditional. You know most people use automated systems now, right? At the time, I brushed it off. I had nothing to prove to her. I had built a life, a business, and a financial foundation long before she ever stepped into it. But those comments, they stayed with me. And when the numbers started changing, when the patterns stopped making sense, I began to realize something I hadn't wanted to admit. This wasn't just about money. It was about control. And somewhere along the way, I had started to lose mine. I didn't say anything yet. I didn't accuse anyone. But I watched. I recorded. I waited. Because deep down, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever was happening in those accounts, it wasn't a mistake, and sooner or later, the truth would leave a trail. Melissa Carter didn't walk into our family like a storm. Storms announce themselves. They rumble. They warn you. They give you time to prepare. They give you time to prepare. Melissa arrived like sunlight, warm, polished, effortless. The first time I met her, she stood in my doorway holding a bottle of wine and a smile so practiced it almost felt rehearsed. Mrs. Waverly Lissa arrived like sunlight, warm, polished, effortless. The first time I met her, she stood in my doorway holding a bottle of wine and a smile so practiced it almost felt rehearsed. Mrs. Waverly, she said gently, I've heard so much about you. Her voice was soft, respectful, carefully measured. And for a moment, just a moment, I believed it. Ethan looked happier than I had seen him in years. There was a lightness in his posture, a kind of pride when he introduced her. This is Melissa, he said. She works in corporate consulting. Finance mostly. Finance. I remember thinking that was interesting. Even then, because I've always believed you can learn a lot about a person by how they talk about money. That first dinner went smoothly. Too smoothly, maybe. Melissa complimented everything, the house, the food, even the way I had organized my bookshelves. Oh, I love how everything is categorized, she said, running her fingers along the spines. It's so... Melissa complimented everything: the house, the food, even the way I had organized my bookshelves. Oh, I love how everything is categorized, she said, running her fingers along the spines. It's so intentional. It sounded like admiration. But there was something else under it, something I couldn't quite name at the time. Weeks turned into months, and before long, she was part of everything. Birthdays, Sunday dinners, holiday planning. She knew how to insert herself into conversations without ever seeming intrusive. She listened just enough, spoke just enough, and slowly, so slowly, I didn't notice it happening, she began to reshape the atmosphere around us. It started with small suggestions. "You know, Ethan," she said one evening, casually stirring her coffee, "most businesses your size are moving toward automated accounting systems." Ethan glanced at me. "Mom's system works fine." Melissa smiled. "Of course it does. I'm just saying it might be worth modernizing. Reduce manual errors, increase efficiency." Manual errors. I felt that phrase settle in the room like dust. I said nothing, but I noticed. Another time, she asked me directly, "Do you ever worry about losing data? I mean, paper files can be fragile." "I have digital backups," I replied. "Oh, that's good," she said quickly. "Although older systems can sometimes be vulnerable." Again that tone, polite, but pointed. At first, I told myself she was just trying to help, that this was her way of contributing. But over time, the comments changed. They became less like suggestions and more like corrections. That's not how we usually categorize expenses in corporate structures. You might be double counting depreciation here. Are you sure this figure is accurate? Always with a smile. Always in front of Ethan. And little by little, I saw something shift in him. At first, he would defend me. "Mom's been doing this for years," he'd say. "She knows what she's doing." But Melissa was patient. She never pushed too hard in one moment. Instead, she planted seeds, and she waited. I remember the exact moment I realized things had changed. We were sitting at the kitchen table going over some quarterly numbers. Ethan had asked me to review them with him, something we had done together countless times before. But this time, Melissa sat beside him, not across the table, not observing, beside him, looking at the same documents, following every line. I pointed to a discrepancy in one of the expense categories. "This doesn't match the previous quarter," I said. "There's an increase here that doesn't have a corresponding entry." Ethan leaned in, frowning slightly. But before he could respond, Melissa spoke. "It's part of the restructuring," she said smoothly. "What restructuring?" I asked. She didn't hesitate. "The adjustments we discussed last month. Ethan approved them." I turned to my son. "Ethan." He shifted in his seat. "Well, yeah. Melissa explained it to me. It made sense." I felt something tighten in my chest. Why wasn't I informed? Melissa's smile didn't falter. "Oh, I assumed Ethan had told you. It wasn't anything major. Not anything major. A financial restructuring done without my knowledge." I looked at Ethan again, just hoping that he would see what I was seeing. But he didn't. He looked uncertain, caught somewhere between us. "It's fine, Mom," he said. "Melissa's been helping streamline things. It's actually been really helpful." Helpful. That word echoed in my mind long after the conversation ended, because that was the moment I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. This wasn't about helping. This was about replacing. Over the next few weeks, the changes accelerated. Melissa started handling more of the communications with banks. She began reviewing statements before I even saw them. She suggested consolidating accounts, adjusting access permissions, simplifying oversight. Each suggestion sounded reasonable on its own. but together they created a pattern, a shift in control. And the most unsettling part, Ethan was agreeing to all of it. I tried to speak with him privately once. "Ethan," I said gently, "I feel like I'm being pushed out of decisions that affect all of us." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Mom, you're not being pushed out. We're just updating things, making them more efficient." "By cutting me out?" I asked quietly. "That's not what I'm doing," he insisted. "I just think maybe it's time you didn't have to handle everything alone." It sounded kind, thoughtful even, but it didn't feel that way, because I had never asked to step back. And more importantly, I had never made a mistake that required replacing. Still, I didn't argue. Not then, because something inside me had already begun connecting the pieces. The strange transactions, the vague explanations, the increasing distance between me and the finances I had built my life around. And at the center of it all was Melissa. Always calm, always prepared, always one step ahead. I started watching her more closely after that. Not openly, not in a way anyone could notice, but I paid attention to the way she handled documents, to the way she redirected conversations, to the way she always seemed to know exactly what to say to make Ethan trust her and doubt me. And the more I watched, the clearer it became. Melissa wasn't just adjusting our financial system. She was rewriting it. And if I didn't act soon, I wasn't just going to lose control. I was going to lose the truth. The first time I truly understood that something was wrong, not just different, not just uncomfortable, but wrong, was the morning I found the missing money. It was a quiet Tuesday. The kind of morning where the house feels too still, like it's holding its breath. I had my coffee beside me, untouched, already going cold, as I scrolled through the latest account statements. This had become my ritual. Even as Melissa slowly edged her way into handling more of the finances, I refused to let go completely. I told myself I was just reviewing, just keeping an eye on things. But the truth was simpler. I didn't trust what I couldn't see. That morning, I wasn't looking for anything unusual. I was just checking, confirming that everything was still where it should be, until it wasn't. At first, I thought it was a mistake, a simple misread. The number on the screen didn't match the number in my head, and when you've spent decades doing this, you learn to trust that instinct immediately. I blinked, leaned closer, adjusted my glasses. Then I checked again. The account balance was lower than it should have been. Not by a few $100s, not even a few thousand, by over $180,000. I felt the air leave my lungs. That kind of discrepancy doesn't happen by accident. Not in a system like mine. My fingers hovered over the mouse as I scrolled through the transaction history, my heart beginning to pound in a way I hadn't felt in years. And then I saw it. A transfer. Clean. Clinical. Almost elegant in its simplicity. No clutter. No explanation beyond 2 words. Investment allocation. I stared at the screen for a long time, long enough that the silence in the house began to feel oppressive. Because I knew something deep in my bones. We didn't make investments like that, not without documentation, not without discussion, not without me. My first instinct was to call Ethan, to demand an explanation, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the way Melissa had been speaking lately, the way she always had an answer ready, the way she turned every question into a misunderstanding. So instead, I printed the transaction, carefully, quietly, and placed it on my desk. Then I started digging. I went through the files Melissa had recently updated. The new digital folders she had reorganized. The accounts she had claimed were now streamlined, and what I found didn't make sense. There was no supporting documentation, no contracts, no invoices, no correspondence, nothing that justified moving that amount of money. It was as if the transaction existed in isolation, which in financial terms is impossible. Every dollar has a story, every movement has a reason. And if you can't find it, it usually means someone doesn't want you to. That was when I decided to ask. Not accuse, not confront, just ask. Ethan came over that evening. Melissa with him, of course. She rarely let him come alone anymore. We sat in the living room, the same place where I had once helped him with homework, where Charles used to read the newspaper, where our life had unfolded in quiet, ordinary moments. Now, it felt like a stage. And I was no longer the one in control. I noticed something in the accounts, I said, carefully keeping my tone calm. Ethan looked up. What is it? I slid the print D page across the table. This transfer, I noticed something in the accounts, I said, carefully keeping my tone calm. Ethan looked up. What is it? I slid the printed page across the table. This transfer, I said. Can you explain it to me? He picked it up, frowning slightly as he read. But before he could respond, Melissa leaned forward. Oh, that, she said lightly. That's one of the investment reallocations I mentioned. I turned to her slowly. You mentioned no such thing to me. She didn't flinch. I discussed it with Ethan, she replied smoothly. I assumed he had filled you in. I looked at my son again. He shifted, uncomfortable. Well, yeah, he said. Melissa found a better opportunity, higher return potential. Without documentation, I asked. It's handled differently, Melissa cut in. Not everything needs to be buried in paperwork anymore, Savannah. Buried, that word again, as if the system I had built was something excessive, something outdated. Every investment needs documentation, I said firmly. That's not optional. That's basic financial responsibility. Melissa smiled, but this time there was no warmth in it. Things have changed, she said. The world moves faster now. We don't need to operate like it's 1995. Ethan let out a small laugh like he was trying to ease the tension. Mom, she's right. It's just a different approach. A different approach. I felt something cold settle in my chest. This is not about approach, I said quietly. This is about accountability. Melissa leaned back, crossing her legs. There is accountability, she said. You just don't understand the structure. There it was, clearer than ever. Not confusion, not misunderstanding, dismissal. Calculated, intentional. And where is the money now? I asked. In a managed fund, she replied immediately. Which fund? A private one. With what documentation? She paused just for a fraction of a second. But I saw it. Then she smiled again. I can get that information for you, she said. Later. Always just out of reach. I nodded slowly. Please do. The conversation ended there, at least on the surface, but something had shifted. Because that night after they left, I sat alone in my study and looked at that printed page again. And I knew, with a clarity that cut through every doubt Melissa had tried to plant, this wasn't a new system. This wasn't modernization. This wasn't efficiency. This was concealment. And if one transaction had no explanation, there would be more. I opened my drawer and took out the small folder I had been building, the one I hadn't told anyone about. I added the new document to the stack. Then I wrote the date on the top corner. Carefully, deliberately, because if there was one thing I had learned in all my years, it was this. Patterns don't reveal themselves all at once. They build, quietly, patiently, until one day they become impossible to ignore. And something told me this was only the beginning. If you had asked me years ago what betrayal looked like, I would have told you it was loud. I would have said it came with raised voices, slammed doors, accusations you could point to and say that's the moment everything broke. But I was wrong. Real betrayal doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in, quietly, patiently, until one day you realize you're no longer standing on solid ground and you don't even remember when it started to shift. That was exactly what Melissa was doing to me. And the worst part, she never raised her voice. Not once. After the conversation about the missing money, I expected tension. I expected distance, maybe even confrontation. Instead, she became kinder, more attentive. Savannah. I picked up your favorite tea, she said one afternoon, placing a box gently on the kitchen counter. Thought you might like it. I thanked her. Of course I did, because that's what polite people do. But something about it felt wrong. It didn't match the cold precision in her voice from the night before. It didn't match the way she had dismissed my concerns like they were nothing more than confusion. And yet there she was, smiling, thoughtful, almost caring. It would have been comforting if I hadn't already started to see the pattern. Because alongside the kindness came something else. Subtle corrections, quiet contradictions, small shifts in reality. At first, they were easy to miss. I think Savannah misunderstood that conversation Melissa said casually one evening when Ethan brought up the investment again. We talked about it briefly. Remember? You were in the room. I frowned. I was not in the room. She tilted her head slightly as if confused. Oh, maybe I'm mixing it up. It's just that I remember explaining it. Ethan looked between us. Well, I remember something like that, he said slowly. Something like that. That was all it took. A seed of doubt. Not enough to prove anything, but enough to make me question myself. Another time, I mentioned a transaction I had seen. The one labeled external services. I said, "Do you remember that?" Melissa nodded immediately. Yes, that was for a consulting fee. That's not what it said, I replied. She smiled again. It's probably just categorized differently in your version of the files. My version. As if there were multiple truths. As if the system I had built, clear, consistent, precise, was suddenly unreliable. I started writing things down after that. Not just transactions, conversations, dates, exact words. Because something inside me was beginning to fracture. And I needed something solid to hold on to. I had spent my entire life trusting my memory. But now that trust was being chipped away. One careful moment at a time. The real turning point came a week later. Ethan had invited a few relatives over for dinner. Nothing formal, just family. The kind of gathering that used to feel warm and familiar. But that night, I felt like a guest in my own home. Melissa moved through the kitchen with ease, laughing, hosting, directing everything like she had always belonged there. I stayed mostly quiet, observing, listening, until the conversation shifted. I swear, Melissa said lightly, holding a glass of wine, keeping up with everything Savannah used to manage is impressive. I don't know how she did it. There was a pause. Something about her tone made people lean in. It's a lot, she continued. And honestly, I think it started to get overwhelming for her. I felt my spine straighten. I'm right here, I said calmly. She turned to me with that same gentle smile. Of course you are, she said, and you've done an amazing job for years. But things change. It's natural. Natural. The word hung in the air. I'm not overwhelmed, I said. No, she replied quickly. Not in a bad way. Just, I think it's been harder for you to keep track of everything lately. There it was. Clear, deliberate, and this time, not private. Public. I looked around the room, at the faces of people who had known me for decades, people who had trusted me, And what I saw made my stomach drop. Uncertainty, not agreement, not disbelief, just doubt. That was all she needed. Ethan cleared his throat. Melissa's just trying to help Mom. Help! Always help! I don't need help remembering my own work, I said quietly. Melissa's expression softened. I know you don't want to need help, she said gently, but there's nothing wrong with accepting it. Help. Always help. I don't need help remembering my own work, I said quietly. Melissa's expression softened. I know you don't want to need help, she said gently, but there's nothing wrong with accepting it. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't about money anymore. This wasn't about systems or efficiency or modernization. This was about credibility, and she was dismantling mine, piece by piece, in front of the people who mattered most. I stood up slowly. I think I'm going to turn in early, I said. No one stopped me. No one followed, because from their perspective, nothing dramatic had happened. No argument, no scene. Just a concerned daughter-in-law and an aging woman who might be struggling to keep up. I went upstairs and closed my door, and for the first time in years, I cried. Not because of the money, not because of the control I was losing, but because I could feel something far more dangerous slipping away. My voice, my authority, my truth. And once those are gone, it doesn't matter what the numbers say. No one listens. I sat at my desk later that night, staring at the small stack of papers I had hidden away. The transactions, the notes, the dates. It wasn't much. Not yet. But it was something. Something real. Something that hadn't been rewritten, reinterpreted, or dismissed. And as I looked at it, one thought became clearer than anything else. Melissa wasn't just trying to take over the finances. She was trying to make sure that when the truth finally came out, no one would believe me. I wiped my tears, straightened the papers, and placed them carefully back into the drawer. Because if she thought I was going to fade quietly into the background, if she thought I would start doubting myself enough to step aside, then she didn't know me at all. I had spent 30 years protecting this family, and I wasn't about to stop now, even if I had to do that alone. The morning I realized everything was gone, I didn't scream. I didn't panic. At least not right away. Because when something is taken from you slowly, piece by piece, your mind learns to brace itself. It learns to expect loss in small doses. But nothing prepares you for the moment when it all disappears at once. It started like any other morning. I woke up early, just after 6, the house still quiet. The kind of quiet I used to love before it began to feel like isolation. I made my coffee, carried it into my study, and sat down at my desk with the intention of doing what I always did. Check. Review. Confirm. Ground myself in something real. I reached for the bottom drawer, the one no one knew about, the one where I kept the separate folder, the transactions, the notes, the small pieces of truth I had been collecting. I pulled it open and froze. The folder was gone. At first, I thought I had misplaced it, that I had moved it somewhere else the night before and simply forgotten. But that didn't make sense. I don't forget things like that, not important things. Still, I checked anyway. I opened the top drawer, then the side cabinet, then the bookshelf behind me. I even checked the kitchen, the dining table, places I would never normally leave something so important. Nothing. My heart started to beat faster. Not yet panic, just something sharper, something colder. I went back to the desk and opened the drawer again, as if the folder might somehow reappear if I looked at it differently. It didn't. That's when the panic began, because that folder wasn't just paper. It was my only proof. Every transaction I had questioned, every note I had written, every small piece of a pattern I was trying to understand. Gone. I stood up too quickly, knocking my chair slightly backward. The sound echoed in the quiet room louder than it should have been. No, I whispered under my breath. I moved to my computer. If the physical records were gone, the digital ones would still be there. They had to be. I turned it on, my hands trembling just enough to make it difficult to type my password. The screen loaded. My desktop appeared, and for a moment, I felt relief. Until I opened the files, the folders were still there. The names were the same, but when I clicked on them, they were empty. Every single one. I stared at the screen, unable to process what I was seeing. I clicked another folder. Empty. Another. Empty. Years of records. Organized. Backed up. Protected. Gone. Just like that. And that was the moment it hit me. Not like a wave, but like something collapsing inside my chest. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. Someone had gone into my study, opened my drawers, accessed my computer, and erased everything. I didn't need to ask who, because there was only one person in that house who had both the access and the motive. Melissa. I sat there for a long time, long enough for the coffee beside me to grow completely cold, long enough for the initial shock to settle into something heavier, something more dangerous, helplessness. Because without those records, I had nothing, no proof of the missing transactions, no documentation, no timeline, nothing to show that what I had been seeing, what I had been feeling was real. And Melissa knew that. Of course she did. That's why she had waited. Why she had been so careful. Why she had slowly chipped away at my credibility before making her move. Because now, even if I spoke up, even if I told Ethan everything, what would I show him? Empty folders, missing papers that would only prove one thing, that I had nothing. And in Melissa's version of the story, that would mean I had imagined it all. I don't know how long I sat there before I heard her voice. Savannah. It came from the doorway, soft, casual, as if nothing had happened. I turned slowly. She stood there leaning lightly against the frame, dressed perfectly as always. Not a hair out of place. "Everything okay?" she asked. I studied her face, looking for something. Guilt, nervousness, anything that would confirm what I already knew. But there was nothing. Just that same calm expression. "I can't find my files," I said. She tilted her head slightly. "Which files?" "My records," I replied. "The ones in this room." She walked in slowly, glancing around like she was genuinely trying to help. "Oh," she said after a moment. "Those." Something in my chest tightened. "Yes," I said carefully. "Those." She smiled. Small, almost amused. "I cleaned them up," she said. The words landed with a strange kind of silence. "You what I asked." "I cleaned them up," she repeated, as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world. "There was a lot of clutter, Savannah. Old documents duplicate files. It wasn't efficient." I stared at her. "You deleted them?" "I organized what was necessary," she said calmly. "The rest was outdated. Outdated. 30 years of records. Outdated. You had no right." I said, my voice shaking now, despite my effort to stay composed. She didn't flinch. "I was helping," she replied. Ethan agreed that it was time to streamline things. Ethan, of course. You erased everything, I said. Not everything, she corrected lightly. Just what wasn't needed anymore. And who decided that I asked? She met my eyes then, and for the first time I saw it clearly. Not kindness, not concern, control. I did, she said. There was no hesitation, no apology, just certainty. I felt something inside me break. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Because in that moment I understood the full weight of what she had done. She hadn't just taken my records, she had taken my ability to prove anything. And without that, I was exactly what she had been telling everyone I was. Confused, outdated, unreliable. I stepped back slightly, gripping the edge of my desk to steady myself. You shouldn't have done that, I said quietly. She shrugged. It needed to be done. And just like that, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, alone, surrounded by empty folders, empty drawers, empty proof. And for the first time since this all began, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel determined. I didn't even feel scared. I felt erased. But somewhere beneath that feeling, buried deep but still there, was something else. A memory. Faint, uncertain, of a backup. Something I had done months ago, maybe longer. I couldn't remember exactly what it was, or where I had stored it. Only that it existed. And in that moment, as I stood there, in the silence she had created, that tiny, fragile possibility became the only thing keeping me from completely falling apart. Because if there was even the smallest chance that something had survived, then so had the truth. Humiliation doesn't always come in the form of shouting or confrontation. Sometimes it comes dressed as concern, wrapped in soft voices, careful words, and just enough doubt to make everyone else look at you differently. That Sunday, I walked into my own dining room and felt like I didn't belong there. Ethan had invited a few relatives over again, his cousin Mark and his wife Aunt Denise, even an old neighbor who had known our family for years. It should have felt familiar, comforting. Instead, it felt staged. Like I was stepping into a room where the story had already been written, and I was the only one who hadn't read the script. Melissa greeted everyone at the door. Of course she did. She had taken over that role completely now. Come in, she said warmly, her voice bright and inviting. Dinner's almost ready. She moved through the house like she owned it, and perhaps in some ways she already did. I stayed in the background, watching, observing the way she laughed at the right moments, the way she placed a gentle hand on Ethan's arm when she spoke, the way she subtly guided conversations without anyone noticing. It was impressive and terrifying, because I could see exactly what she was doing, even if no one else could. Dinner began normally enough. Plates passed. Polite conversation. The clinking of glasses. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to hope just a little that things might stay that way. That maybe, just maybe, she would leave me alone this time. But I should have known better. It started with something small, always so meething small. I was just telling Ethan that maybe, just maybe, she would leave me alone this time. But I should have known better. It started with something small, always something small. I was just telling Ethan, Melissa said, lightly cutting into her chicken, how much I admire everything Savannah has handled over the years. There it was, that tone, the one that sounded like praise but never was. I kept my eyes on my plate. I mean, managing finances for that long? She continued. That's not easy, especially without modern tools. Mark nodded politely. Yeah, that's a lot of responsibility. I didn't respond. I had learned by now that responding too quickly only gave her more room to maneuver. But she wasn't finished. Honestly, she added, I don't know how she kept up with it all for so long. Kept. Past tense. I felt it. That subtle shift. From capable to once capable. Denise leaned forward slightly. What do you mean? Melissa smiled just a little. Oh, nothing serious, she said quickly. It's just things have gotten more complex over time. More accounts, more transactions. It can be overwhelming. Overwhelming. I placed my fork down carefully. I'm not overwhelmed, I said. My voice was calm, measured, but I could feel every eye in the room turned toward me. Melissa looked at me with that same gentle expression. I didn't mean it like that, she said softly. I just think it's natural for things to become harder to manage over time. Natural. Again, always natural. As if this decline she was describing was inevitable. As if I had no control over it. I've managed just fine, I replied. There was a pause. A brief, fragile moment where the room seemed to hold its breath. And then Ethan spoke. Mom, Melissa's just saying we're trying to make things easier for you. Easier? I looked at him, really looked at him. And what I saw hurt more than anything Melissa had said. Because he believed it. He truly believed he was helping me. I didn't ask for things to be easier, I said quietly. Melissa reached for her glass, taking a small sip before speaking again. No one's saying you did, she said. But sometimes we don't realize when we need support. There it was, clear, carefully placed, a suggestion disguised as kindness, that I didn't realize something was wrong with me, that I couldn't see it myself. I felt my hands tighten slightly in my lap. You seem to be making a lot of assumptions about me, I said. Her smile didn't waver. I'm just concerned, she replied. Concerned. Such a dangerous word. Because how do you argue with concern? Without looking defensive, without confirming exactly what she wants people to believe? Mark cleared his throat awkwardly. Well, I'm sure everything's fine, he said, trying to ease the tension. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. I could feel it in the room. That shift. Not judgment. Not yet. But something worse. Uncertainty. The beginning of doubt. And once that starts, it spreads. Like a crack in glass. Slow at first. Then all at once. I looked around the table at people who had known me for decades, who had trusted me, respected me, and now they were watching me differently, not questioning Melissa, not challenging her, just watching me, waiting, as if they expected me to confirm what she was implying. I pushed my chair back gently. I think I've had enough for tonight, I said. Ethan frowned. Mom? I'm just tired, I added quickly. Tired. It was easier to say that, safer. Because if I said anything else, if I tried to defend myself, I would sound exactly like what she had been painting me to be. Confused, emotional, unstable. So I chose silence. And in doing so, I realized something that frightened me more than anything else. Silence was exactly what she wanted. I left the table and walked upstairs, each step heavier than the last. Behind me, I could hear the conversation resume. Laughter. Voices. Normal. As if nothing had happened. As if I hadn't just been slowly dismantled in front of my own family. I closed my bedroom door and leaned against it, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. For a moment, I just stood there, still, trying to steady myself. But it didn't work. Because the truth was, I wasn't just losing control of the finances anymore. I was losing something far more important: my credibility, my voice, my place in this family. And without those, it didn't matter what I knew. It didn't matter what I had seen. Even if I found proof, who would believe me? I walked over to my nightstand and sat down slowly. That was when my phone buzzed. I picked it up. A message from Linda Brooks. I hadn't spoken to her in a few days. Not since everything had started escalating. The message was simple. "Savannah, something doesn't feel right. Call me." I stared at it for a long moment, because Linda was the one person who had always seen things clearly. The one person who never dismissed my instincts. And in that moment, with everything around me starting to feel uncertain, that message felt like a lifeline. I pressed call. She picked up immediately. "Savannah," she said. "Are you okay?" I hesitated. Just for a second. Then I said the truth. "No," I whispered. "I don't think I am." There was silence on the other end. Not uncomfortable, not uncertain, just listening. "Tell me everything," Linda said. And for the first time since this all began, I did. I told her about the missing money, the erased files, the conversations, the way Melissa had been shifting things slowly, carefully. When I finished, there was another pause, longer this time. And then Linda spoke. "You need someone who can look at this objectively," she said. "I don't have any records left," I replied. She deleted everything. "Then you need someone who knows how to find what's left," Linda said. I frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she continued, her voice steady, "you need a professional, someone who deals with financial records every day, someone who knows how to trace things even when they've been erased." My heart skipped. "Linda, I know a guy," she said. Of course she did. Linda always knew someone. "He's good, Savannah. Really good. And more importantly, he doesn't take things at face value." I closed my eyes for a moment, because for the first time in days, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Hope. Small, fragile, but real. "What's his name?" I asked. "Robert Hayes," she said. And I didn't know it yet, but that name was about to change everything. The first time I met Robert Hayes, I almost didn't go inside. I sat in my car for nearly 10 minutes, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at the modest brick building in front of me. It wasn't impressive. No towering glass windows, no polished corporate sign. Just a small brass plaque near the door. Robert Hayes, CPA. That was it. After everything that had happened, the missing money, the erased files, the quiet unraveling of my credibility, I had imagined something bigger. Someone sharper. But Linda had insisted. "He's exactly who you need," she had said. "Not flashy, not easily fooled." So I took a breath, opened the car door, and stepped out. The air was cool that morning, the kind that makes you feel awake whether you want to be or not. I walked up to the door, hesitated for just a second, then pushed it open. The inside was simple, clean, organized. That alone made me feel a little better. There were shelves lined with neatly labeled binders. A desk that looked used, not decorative. Papers stacked with intention, not cluttered, not chaotic. It felt real. "Mrs. Waverly." I turned at the sound of his voice. Robert Hayes was not what I expected either. He wasn't young, but he wasn't old. Maybe mid-50s. Gray just beginning at his temples. No-nonsense posture. Calm eyes that seemed to take in more than he let on. "Yes," I said. "Savannah Waverly." He nodded once. "Linda told me you might come by. Please have a seat. No small talk, no unnecessary pleasantries. Just direct." I sat down across from his desk, folding my hands in my lap to keep them from trembling. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "Tell me what you know, not what you think." That caught me off guard. Most people, when you tell them something is wrong, immediately ask what you suspect, what you feel. But he didn't. He wanted facts. And for the first time in days, that felt like solid ground. "I know money is missing," I said. "A large amount. At least $180,000. He nodded slightly. "Go on." And for the first time in days, that felt like solid ground. "I know money is missing," I said. "A large amount. At least $180,000. He nodded slightly. "Go on." "I know there were multiple transactions over several months. They were labeled vaguely investment consulting, things like that. No supporting documentation." He leaned back slightly, listening. "I know my files, both physical and digital, were deleted. Completely. Without my permission? Who had access?" he asked. "My daughter-in-law," I said immediately. "Melissa Carter, and my son, Ethan." He didn't react. Didn't write anything down yet. Just listened. "And what do you not have?" he asked. I hesitated. "Proof," I said quietly. "Not anymore." He nodded again. "That's not entirely true," he said. I frowned slightly. "It feels true," I replied. "That's not the same thing," he said calmly. Something about the way he said it made me sit up a little straighter. "Explain," I said. He folded his hands on the desk. "Financial records don't exist in isolation," he said. "You can delete files, but you can't erase every trace of a transaction." "Not completely." I felt something stir in my chest. "Even if the files are gone?" I asked. "Especially then," he replied. "Because when someone tries to hide something, they usually miss what they don't think matters." My mind started racing. "What kind of traces?" I asked. "Bank logs, transfer pathways, external accounts, timing discrepancies," he said. "Digital systems leave footprints, Mrs. Waverly. You just need to know where to look." For the first time since everything had fallen apart, I felt it, that small, fragile hope again. "So, you can find it?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for a pen and finally began to write. "I can look," he said, "but I need access. Account numbers. Anything you still remember. Any detail, no matter how small." I swallowed. I remember everything I said. That was the one thing Melissa hadn't been able to take from me. Not yet. Over the next hour, I told him everything I could recall. Account structures, transfer patterns, dates that had stood out to me, even small details like the way certain transactions had been labeled. He wrote it all down, occasionally asking a question, never interrupting unnecessarily. And the more we talked, the more I began to feel something shifting inside me. Not fear, not doubt, clarity. Because for the first time, someone wasn't questioning whether I was right. They were trying to understand how I was right. When I finished, he set his pen down. "This is enough to start," he said. My heart tightened slightly. "Start?" I asked. "How long will it take?" "That depends on what we find," he replied, and how careful the person was. I thought of Melissa, her calm smile, her precise words. "She's careful," I said. He looked at me for a moment, then nodded. "They always are," he said. "At first." Something about that answer made my breath catch. "At first," I repeated. He leaned forward slightly. "People who manipulate systems over time tend to get confident," he said. "And confidence leads to patterns. Patterns lead to mistakes." I held on to that, like a lifeline. "So there will be a mistake?" I asked. There usually is, he said. The question is whether we can find it. I nodded slowly, because now I understood something I hadn't before. Melissa hadn't just erased my records. She had erased what she thought was evidence. But if Robert was right, then the truth wasn't gone. It was just hidden. I need you to do something for me, he said. Anything, I replied. Don't confront them, he said. Not yet. I frowned. I already have, I admitted. He shook his head slightly. Not like this. Not while we're looking. If they think you suspect more than you've already said, they'll adjust. They'll move things, and that makes my job harder. I understood, even if I didn't like it. So I act like nothing's changed, I said. Yes, he replied. Can you do that? I thought about Melissa, about the way she watched me, about the way she controlled every interaction. And then I thought about the empty folders, the missing proof, the quiet humiliation. I can, I said, because I had already been doing it for weeks. He nodded once. Good, he said. I'll be in touch. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling steadier than they had when I walked in. As I reached the door, he spoke again. Mrs. Waverly, I turned. You said your daughter-in-law deleted everything, he said. Yes. He paused, then added, People don't destroy evidence unless they're afraid of it. I held his gaze, and for the first time since this began, I felt something stronger than fear, something sharper than doubt. Determination. Because if Melissa was afraid of those records, then she already knew what they would prove. And soon, so would we. The hardest part about pretending everything is normal is remembering what normal used to feel like. Because once you've seen the cracks, once you've felt the ground shift beneath your feet, you can't unsee it. You can only pretend. And pretending, I learned quickly, is exhausting. The next few days after meeting Robert felt like walking a tightrope. Every word I spoke, every reaction I gave, I measured it, carefully, deliberately. Melissa was watching me. I knew that now. Not in an obvious way, not with suspicion written across her face, but in small, quiet moments. The way her eyes lingered a second longer than necessary when I spoke. The way she seemed to pause just slightly before responding, as if calculating what version of herself to present. She was assessing me, just like I was assessing her, and neither of us said a word about it. Savannah, would you like me to handle the bills this week? She asked one morning, her tone light, almost casual. I looked up from my coffee. For a split second, my instinct was to refuse, to push back, to reclaim even the smallest piece of control. But Robert's voice echoed in my mind. Don't confront them. Not yet. So I smiled. A small, polite smile that felt foreign on my face. That would be helpful, I said. She studied me for just a moment, as if she expected resistance. When it didn't come, she nodded. Of course, she said, and just like that she walked away. But I saw it, that flicker of something in her eyes, not satisfaction, not relief, something closer to suspicion. Because people like Melissa don't just want control. They want resistance. They want something to push against, because resistance justifies their narrative. And my silence, that disrupted it. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed calmer, lighter even, as if the absence of conflict meant everything was finally settling into place. Things have been better lately, he said one evening, sitting across from me in the living room. I forced a small nod. They have, I replied. He smiled. I think we were all just adjusting, he said, Melissa's been trying really hard to help. Help. Always that word. I swallowed the response that rose in my throat. Because if I said what I was really thinking, if I told him that his wife had erased my work, taken control of everything I had built, and was quietly rewriting reality, he wouldn't believe me, not without proof, and proof was what I was waiting for. I'm glad things feel easier for you, I said instead. He didn't notice the distance in my voice, or, if he did, he chose not to acknowledge it. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone in my study. The room felt different now, not empty, but violated, like something sacred had been disturbed and couldn't be restored. I opened my laptop again, not to search for files. I already knew they were gone, but to look, to observe, to see what remained. And that's when I noticed something. It was small, so small that most people would have ignored it. But I wasn't most people. Not anymore. There was a timestamp on one of the system folders. It had been modified, recently, after Melissa had claimed to clean up everything. I clicked on it. The folder itself was empty, just like the others. But the timestamp, it didn't match. My heart started to beat faster. Because timestamps don't lie. They record actions, changes, movements, and this one told me something important. Something had been accessed after everything was supposedly deleted. I grabbed my phone and took a picture of the screen, then another, and another, documenting it. Because I wasn't making the same mistake twice. I wasn't going to rely on memory alone. This time, I would have evidence. The next morning, my phone rang. Robert. I answered immediately. Mrs. Waverly, he said. I've started reviewing what you gave me. My grip tightened slightly. And, I asked. There's activity, he said. My breath caught. What kind of activity? Transactions that match the pattern you described, he replied. Small at first, then increasing in size, all routed through intermediary accounts. Intermediary accounts. I closed my eyes for a moment. So it's real, I whispered. It's more than real, he said. It's structured. A chill ran through me. Structured how? Deliberate layering, he explained. Money moved in stages to make it harder to trace. That's not something done by accident. I knew that, but hearing it out loud from someone objective made it undeniable. Can you trace it? I asked. I'm working on it, he said. But I need more time. How much time? Enough to be certain, he replied. Certainty. That was the difference between suspicion and truth. I found something, I said suddenly. He paused. What kind of something? A timestamp, I explained. On one of the system folders. It was accessed after everything was deleted. There was a brief silence. Then, that's important, he said. Why? Because it suggests the deletion wasn't the final step, he replied. Someone went back. My mind raced. Why would they do that? I asked. To check, he said simply. To make sure nothing was left behind. I felt my stomach tighten, because that meant Melissa hadn't just erased the files. She had double-checked, verified, confirmed that everything was gone, or at least everything she thought mattered. I took pictures, I said. Good, he replied immediately. Keep doing that. Anything unusual, document it. I will. There was a pause. Then he added, Mrs. Waverly, whoever is doing this is careful, but not perfect. I held on to that. Have you found where the money went? I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. Not yet, he said. My chest tightened slightly. But I found something else, he continued. Something in his tone changed, sharpened. What? I asked. The accounts receiving the transfers, he said slowly. Yes, they're not random. My heart began to pound. What do you mean they're connected, he said. Connected how? To someone. The room felt suddenly smaller. My voice came out quieter than I expected. Who? There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. And then, I need to confirm before I say anything, he said. Of course he did. Robert didn't deal in guesses, only facts. But the way he said it told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just about missing money anymore. This was about where it had gone, and more importantly, who it had gone to. I ended the call and sat there for a long time. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Because somewhere in that silence, Melissa was moving through her day. Calm. Composed. Certain that everything had been erased. Certain that nothing could be traced. Certain that I had nothing left. And for now, she was right. But not for much longer. Because for the first time since this began, the truth wasn't just a feeling. It was getting closer. And when it finally surfaced, it wouldn't just clear my name. It would expose hers. Waiting for the truth is its own kind of torture. Not the loud, overwhelming kind, but the quiet kind. The kind that settles into your bones and stays there constant, heavy, impossible to ignore. Every day that passed after my call with Robert felt longer than the last. Because now I knew something I hadn't known before. There was something to find. There was a pattern, and somewhere hidden beneath all the careful deletions and quiet manipulations, there was a mistake. But until Robert found it, I had to keep pretending. And Melissa, she was getting more comfortable. That was the first thing I noticed. Her movements around the house became more relaxed, her tone lighter. Even her presence felt bigger, as if she had already won. Savannah. I reorganized the accounts again, she said one afternoon, walking into the living room with a tablet in her hand. I looked up from my book. Oh, I said. Yes, she replied, sitting across from me. Everything's much cleaner now. Easier to track. Easier for her to track. I nodded slowly. I'm sure it is. She studied me. There it was again. That careful observation. She was waiting for something. A reaction. A challenge. But I gave her nothing. Just calm. Just acceptance. And that unsettled her. I could see it. Just beneath the surface. You're very quiet lately, she said. I smiled slightly. I've been thinking about what she asked. Letting go, I said. It wasn't entirely a lie. Her eyes flickered for a moment. Letting go of what? Control, I replied. Responsibility. Things change. I could almost hear the echo of her own words. Things change. For a brief second, she didn't respond. And in that silence, I saw something new. Not confidence. Not control. Something closer to uncertainty. Because this wasn't the reaction she expected. This wasn't the narrative she had been building. I wasn't confused. I wasn't defensive. I wasn't resisting. I was stepping back, and that left her with nothing to push against. That's good, she said finally. It's important to recognize when it's time. Time. I nodded. Yes, I said softly. It is. She stood up shortly after that, excusing herself. But as she walked away, I noticed something. Her steps weren't as steady as usual. Small, subtle, but there. And for the first time since this began, I realized something important. Melissa needed me to play a role, and I had just stepped out of it. That night, my phone rang again. Robert. I answered immediately. Tell me you found something I said. There was no hesitation this time. I did, he replied. My heart started pounding. "What is it?" "I traced one of the intermediary accounts," he said. "It leads to a private financial platform offshore." Offshore. The word landed heavy. "Is that legal?" I asked. "It can be," he said, "but in this case, the structure suggests otherwise." I closed my eyes. "How much?" I asked. "More than you thought," he replied. A chill ran through me. "How much more?" "Closer to 300,000, he said. My breath caught. 300,000. Not 180. Not a miscalculation. Not a misunderstanding. Almost double. I couldn't even finish the sentence. "I know," he said, quietly. I swallowed hard. "Do you know who owns the account?" There was a pause. Then, yes. My fingers tightened around the phone and, "It's registered under a shell company," he said. Of course it was. "And the owner?" I pressed. Another pause. Longer this time. Then, "It leads back to Melissa." The room felt like it tilted. Not because I didn't expect it, but because hearing it made it real. Undeniable. Final. "She took it," I whispered. "Yes," he said. There was no softness in his voice, no hesitation, just fact. "She moved the funds through multiple accounts to obscure the origin," he continued. "But the pattern is consistent. It all leads back to her." I sat down slowly, because my legs suddenly didn't feel steady. "All of it?" I asked. "Every transaction I've traced so far," he said. I pressed my hand to my chest, trying to steady my breathing, because this wasn't just suspicion anymore. This wasn't just a feeling. This was proof. Cold, clear, unavoidable. "What do we do?" I asked. "That depends on you," he said. I frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "You have options," he explained. "Legal action, confrontation, internal resolution. But before any of that, you need to decide how you want this to end. How I want this to end." The question lingered in the air, because for weeks I had only been trying to survive, to understand, to hold on to the truth. But now I had to decide what to do with it. "I want my name back," I said finally. My voice was quiet, but steady. "I want the truth," I added. "You'll have both," he said, "but not without a cost." I knew that. Of course I did, because exposing Melissa would mean exposing everything. To Ethan, to the family, to everyone. It would break something, maybe permanently. But then again, hadn't something already been broken? "I need more," I said. "More?" he asked. "More proof," I clarified. "Enough that no one can question it, not even for a second." There was a pause. Then, "I can do that," he said. "But you need to be ready." "For what?" "For what comes after," he replied. I nodded slowly, even though he couldn't see me, because I understood. This wasn't just about proving Melissa wrong. This was about tearing down the version of reality she had built. And that wouldn't be quiet, wouldn't be easy, wouldn't be clean. But it would be the truth. I ended the call and sat there in the silence. The house felt different now. Not oppressive, not suffocating, but charged, like something was building, something inevitable. Somewhere down the hall, I heard Melissa moving. Her footsteps light, confident, unaware. And for the first time since she walked into my life, I wasn't afraid of her. Because now, I knew exactly what she had done. And soon, everyone else would too. The truth I learned doesn't arrive all at once. It builds, layer by layer, detail by detail, until one day it becomes impossible to ignore. That was the stage we were entering now. No longer suspicion, no longer instinct, but structure, evidence, proof. And yet the closer we got, the more dangerous everything felt. Because Melissa still didn't know. And that meant she was still operating as if she was untouchable, which made her bold. And bold people make bigger mistakes. It started 2 days after Robert confirmed the offshore account. I was in the kitchen when I heard Melissa on the phone. Not unusual, but something about her tone, lower, sharper, controlled, made me pause. I didn't mean to listen. At least that's what I told myself, but I didn't move away either. "I told you not to rush it," she said quietly. A pause. Then, "No, that's not what we agreed." Another pause. I felt my pulse begin to quicken, because this wasn't her usual voice. This wasn't the careful, polished version she showed everyone else. This was real. "You're going to draw attention," she continued, "and that's the last thing we need right now." Attention. The word echoed in my mind because it meant exactly what I thought it meant. She wasn't just managing money, she was managing risk. I stepped back slightly, just enough that she wouldn't see me if she turned. My heart was pounding now. "You need to wait," she said firmly. "I'll handle it." Another pause. Longer this time. Then, "No, absolutely not. You do not contact anyone directly. Do you understand me?" Silence. And then she hung up. I moved quickly then, back into the living room, picking up a magazine, pretending I had been there the entire time. Seconds later, she walked in, her expression calm again, controlled, perfect. But I had seen the crack, just for a moment. "Everything okay?" I asked casually. She smiled. "Of course," she said. "Just a business call." "Business?" I nodded, because now I knew exactly what kind of business she meant. That night I called Robert again. "I heard her on the phone," I said, "doing what he asked. She was arguing with someone," I explained, "about moving too fast, about drawing attention." There was a pause. "That's consistent with what I'm seeing," he said. My stomach tightened. "What are you seeing?" "Activity has increased," he replied. "Larger transfers, more frequent." "Why?" I asked. "Because she feels safe," he said. "Or she feels pressure." Pressure. The word lingered. "From who?" I asked. "That's what I'm trying to determine," he replied. I hesitated. "Robert, is she working alone?" Another pause. Longer this time. "No," he said finally. My chest tightened. "She's not." "No," he repeated. "The structure is too complex for a single person. There's coordination involved." Coordination, which meant there was someone else, someone helping her, or someone above her. "Do you know who I asked?" "Not yet," he said. "But I'm close." Close. Everything was getting closer now. The truth, the exposure, the fallout. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Anything." "Has your son ever had access to these accounts?" he asked. The question hit harder than I expected. "Ethan?" I said. "Yes." I shook my head instinctively. "No, not directly. He never handled the financial structure. That was always me." "Are you certain?" he pressed. "Yes," I said firmly, because that was one thing I knew. Ethan trusted. He didn't manage. That was who he had always been. "Good," Robert said, but his tone wasn't entirely reassuring. "Why are you asking?" I said. "Because the second layer of transfers," he explained, is being authorized through credentials that aren't Melissa's original access. I felt my breath catch. What does that mean? It means someone else has authorization, he said, or she's using credentials that don't belong to her. My mind started racing. Could she have created them? I asked. Possibly, he said, but it would require access at a higher level. Higher level? There weren't many people who had that. In fact, there were only two. Me and Ethan. No, I whispered. Robert didn't respond immediately. I'm not saying he's involved, he said carefully, but we need to consider every possibility. I pressed my hand to my forehead, because suddenly the ground felt unstable. Again. Not in the same way as before. Not confusion, not doubt about myself, but something else. Fear. Not of Melissa, but of what this could mean. No, I repeated more firmly this time. Ethan wouldn't do that. I understand E again. Not in the same way as before. Not confusion, not doubt about myself, but something else. Fear. Not of Melissa, but of what this could mean. No, I repeated more firmly this time. Ethan wouldn't do that. I understand, Robert said, and I hope you're right. Hope, that word again. But this time, it felt fragile. Because if Ethan wasn't involved, then his access had been used without him knowing. And if that was true, then Melissa hadn't just taken money. She had taken something else, something far more dangerous. His trust, his identity. And that would change everything. The next morning, I watched Ethan more closely than I ever had before. Not with suspicion, but with careful attention, looking for anything, any sign, any crack. But he was the same, calm, unaware, talking about work, about dinner plans, about ordinary things that felt so far removed from the storm building beneath the surface. Melissa said she handled the accounts again, he mentioned, casually. I nodded. She did. She's really taken a load off your shoulders, he said. There it was again, that belief, that quiet trust, and for the first time. It hurt differently, not because he didn't believe me, but because he didn't know he should. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I realized something I hadn't fully allowed myself to see before. He wasn't choosing Melissa over me. He was choosing what he thought was stability, peace, normalcy, because he had no idea that everything beneath it was built on lies. And soon, that illusion would shatter, because Robert was close, closer than ever. And when the final piece fell into place, it wouldn't just expose Melissa. It would reveal the full extent of what she had done, who she had used, and how far she was willing to go, even if it meant destroying the very family she had married into. There is a moment just before everything collapses when the world feels eerily calm, too calm, like the air before a storm. That was the feeling that settled over the house in the days that followed. Melissa moved through her routines like nothing had changed. Coffee in the morning, emails in the afternoon, soft conversations with Ethan in the evening. If anything, she seemed more relaxed than ever. And that more than anything else told me we were getting close, because people only relax when they believe they are safe. And Melissa believed she was untouchable. But Robert had called me that morning, and this time there was no hesitation in his voice. We have everything, he said. I didn't speak for a moment, because those 3 words, we have everything, carried the weight of weeks of silence, doubt, fear, and patience. Everything I asked quietly. Transactions, Routing paths, timestamps, authorization logs, he said. And most importantly, identity linkage. My grip tightened around the phone. Explain, I said. The secondary authorization we talked about? He continued. Yes, it wasn't just used, he said. It was duplicated. A chill ran through me. Duplicated? Yes, he replied. Someone created a mirror credential, same level of access, same authority, but under a different control point. My heart began to race. And that control point, it ties back to a corporate entity, he said. Another shell company? I asked. No, he said, and then, it's registered under Ethan's name. Everything inside me went still, not shattered, not broken, just still. That's not possible, I said. I thought you might say that, Robert replied calmly. My voice felt distant even to myself. He didn't do this. I know, Robert said, and there was something in his tone steady, certain. That account was created without his direct involvement, he continued, but his identity was used to legitimize access. I closed my eyes, because suddenly everything made sense. Melissa hadn't just stolen money. She had built protection, a shield, and that shield was my son. She used him, I whispered. Yes, Robert said. My chest tightened painfully, not just from the betrayal, but from the realization of how deep it went. She didn't just erase my records, I said slowly. She replaced them. With a system that points away from her, Robert confirmed, and toward him. I finished. There was a pause. Yes. I sat down heavily, because this was the twist I hadn't allowed myself to imagine. Not because it wasn't possible, but because it was too cruel, too calculated. She set him up, I said. Not entirely, Robert replied carefully. But if this had gone undiscovered, yes, it could have led there. I pressed my hand against my chest, trying to steady the wave of emotion rising inside me. Anger, fear, grief, all at once. What do we do? I asked. We document everything he said, and then you decide how to present it. Present it, not if, but how. Because now there was no question left, only action. I want her to tell the truth, I said. Robert was quiet for a moment. That's not always how this ends, he said. I know, I replied, but I want to give her the chance. Not for her, for Ethan, because he deserved to hear it from her. Not from a report, not from a stranger, from the person he trusted. Prepare everything Robert said, a full report. Clear, undeniable. Thank you, I said, and for the first time, I meant it without hesitation. That evening, I watched Melissa differently, not with suspicion, not with fear, but with clarity. Because now I could see her for exactly what she was. Not just manipulative, not just controlling, but strategic. Every move she had made, not with fear, but with clarity. Because now I could see her for exactly what she was. Not just manipulative, not just controlling, but strategic. Every move she had made, every word she had chosen, had been part of a larger plan. A plan that used trust as a weapon and family as cover. Ethan walked in shortly after dinner, loosening his tie. Long day, he said with a tired smile. I nodded. I can imagine. He sat across from me, exhaling deeply. Melissa mentioned you've been doing better, he said. Better. I almost smiled at the irony. "I've been thinking," I replied, "about what I looked at him, really looked at him, because in just a short time, everything he believed about his life was about to change. About truth," I said. He frowned slightly. "What do you mean? That sometimes," I continued slowly, "the people we trust the most are the ones we understand the least." He gave a small, uncertain laugh. "That sounds serious." "It is," I said. There was a pause. "Is something wrong?" he asked. I held his gaze, and for a moment I considered telling him everything right then, ending it, breaking the illusion. But Robert's voice echoed in my mind. "Be ready for what comes after." So I shook my head. "Not yet," I said softly. He looked confused, but he didn't press, and that told me something important. He trusted me. Still, even now. And that trust was exactly what Melissa had been exploiting. But not for much longer. Because everything was ready now. The proof, the truth, the exposure. And soon, there would be no more pretending, no more silence, no more control, just truth. Raw, unfiltered, and impossible to ignore. I stood up slowly, feeling something settle inside me. Not fear, not anger, but resolve. Because tomorrow, everything would change. And this time, I wouldn't be the one being erased. The day the truth came out, the house felt different before anyone even spoke. There was something in the air, a stillness. Not peaceful, no. Heavy, like everything was waiting. I had invited everyone. Ethan, of course, Melissa, Linda, even Mark and Denise. If this was going to happen, it wasn't going to happen quietly. Because Melissa hadn't destroyed me in private. She had done it in front of everyone. And the truth? The truth deserved the same stage. They arrived one by one. Polite smiles, casual greetings. No one knew what was coming, except me and Robert. Melissa walked in last, confident as always, effortless, unshaken. "Savannah," she said with a soft smile. "You said this was important." "It is," I replied. She glanced around the room, taking in the full gathering. Something flickered in her eyes. Just for a moment, but she recovered quickly. "All right," she said lightly. "What's going on?" I turned to Robert, who had been standing quietly near the doorway. "This is Robert Hayes," I said. "He's a certified public accountant." Melissa's smile tightened just slightly. "A pleasure," she said, but I could see it now. The calculation behind her eyes. She knew. Not everything, but enough. "Robert has been reviewing our financial records," I continued. "Records?" Ethan frowned. You thought they were gone," I said gently. Silence. Thick, immediate. Melissa didn't speak, didn't move, but her posture changed, subtly, like a chess player realizing the board had shifted. "They weren't," I said. "Not entirely." Robert stepped forward, calm, steady, holding a folder. Not thick, not overwhelming, just enough. "Mr. Waverly," he said, addressing Ethan directly. "I'll be as clear as possible." Ethan nodded slowly. "Over the past several months," Robert continued, "there have been multiple unauthorized financial transfers from your family accounts." Melissa let out a small, controlled breath. "Unauthorized?" she repeated. "That's not accurate." "Over the past several months," Robert continued, "there have been multiple unauthorized financial transfers from your family accounts." Melissa let out a small, controlled breath. "Unauthorized," she repeated. That's not accurate. Robert didn't look at her. Not yet. The funds were routed through intermediary accounts, he continued, before being transferred into an offshore financial platform. Ethan's face shifted. Confusion? Concern. What are you saying? He asked. I'm saying, Robert replied calmly, that approximately $300,000 has been moved without proper documentation or consent. The room went completely silent. I could hear my own heartbeat. Melissa laughed softly. A controlled, dismissive sound. This is ridiculous, she said. There are explanations for every transaction. Robert nodded slightly. Yes, he said, there are. And then he opened the folder. Would you like to explain them? He asked. For the first time, Melissa hesitated. Only for a second, but it was enough. I don't think this is the appropriate setting for, she began. I think it is, I said. My voice was calm, but firm. Because she had taken my voice before. She wasn't taking it again. Ethan looked between us. Melissa, he said quietly. She turned to him, softening her expression. I can explain everything, she said, but this is being blown out of proportion. Robert placed a document on the table. Then explain this, he said. Ethan leaned forward, picking it up. His brow furrowed. What is this transfer logs? Robert said, with timestamps routing paths and authorization data. Melissa didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even look at the paper, because she already knew what it said. Ethan's face began to pale. This has my authorization on it, he said. Yes, Robert replied. Ethan looked up, confused. No, he said. I didn't approve this. I know, Robert said. And then, he turned to Melissa. The authorization was duplicated, he continued. A mirrored credential created using Mr. Waverly's identity. The room seemed to freeze. Ethan looked at her, slowly. Melissa, he said. She didn't answer, not immediately, because this was the moment where everything she had built collapsed. It's not what it looks like, she said finally, but her voice, for the first time, wasn't steady. Then what is it? Ethan asked. She shook her head slightly. I was protecting us, she said, managing the ings in a way you wouldn't understand. For the first time, wasn't steady. Then what is it? Ethan asked. She shook her head slightly. I was protecting us, she said. Managing was protecting us, she said. Managing the ings in a way you wouldn't understand. Protecting. That word again. But this time, it sounded hollow. Robert placed another document on the e-table. This is the offshore account ings in a way you wouldn't understand. Protecting. That word again. But this time, it sounded hollow. Robert placed another document on the table. This is the offshore account, he said, registered under a shell corporation. Ethan didn't look away from Melissa. Is it yours? He asked. Silence. Long. Heavy. Then, yes. The word barely left her lips, but it was enough. Everything broke in that moment. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Ethan leaned back slowly, as if the ground beneath him had disappeared. You used my name, he said. It wasn't a question. She didn't deny it. I had to, she said. It was the only way to move things efficiently. Efficiently. I closed my eyes for a moment, because that word had started all of this. I was going to fix it, she added quickly. Reinvest, stabilize. You stole from us. Ethan said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. Melissa shook her head. No. You stole from my family, he repeated, and this time there was no confusion in his voice, only clarity, only truth. She looked at him, and for the first time, she had nothing to say, because there was nothing left to manipulate. No narrative, no illusion, no control. Just truth, raw, unavoidable. And standing in front of everyone, I stepped forward slightly, not to confront her, not to attack, but simply to stand. Because for the first time since this began, I wasn't being attacked. First time since this began, I wasn't being dismissed. I wasn't being doubted. I wasn't being erased. I was being seen. And Melissa, she wasn't the one in control anymore. After the truth is spoken, there is always a silence. Not the kind that feels peaceful, but the kind that feels like something has been torn open and no one knows how to close it again. That silence filled the room. Heavy, unavoidable. Melissa stood there, no longer composed, no longer in control. The carefully constructed version of herself, the calm, capable, always prepared woman had collapsed in front of everyone, and in its place was something far more human and far more dangerous: exposure. Ethan hadn't moved, not since she said yes. He sat there, his hands resting on the table, staring at the papers in front of him as if they might change if he looked long enough. They didn't. Why? He asked finally. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be, because it carried something deeper than anger. It carried betrayal. Melissa opened her mouth, closed it again. For once, she didn't have the words ready. I was trying to build something, she said eventually. Her voice was quieter now, stripped of its usual confidence. Build what Ethan asked. Security, she replied. Growth. Opportunity. With stolen money, he said. She flinched slightly at that. It wasn't stolen, she insisted. It was redirected. Temporarily. Temporarily. I almost let out a breath at that word, because even now, she was trying to reshape reality. Robert spoke before I could. $300,000 routed through offshore accounts without consent is not temporary, he said calmly. It is fraud. The word hung in the air, sharp, final. Melissa's eyes flickered toward him, then back to Ethan. I was going to fix it, she said again. I just needed time. Ethan let out a hollow laugh. Time for what he asked, to move more money, to use my name for something else. That hit her. I saw it, not the accusation, but the clarity behind it, because he understood now. Everything. I didn't have a choice, she said. And that was the moment something shifted again. Because that wasn't just a defense. It was an admission. A choice, I said quietly. For the first time, she looked directly at me, not with control, not with calculation, but with something else. Frustration. You think you made it easy, she said. The room went still again, because now, the mask wasn't just gone, it was shattered. You controlled everything, she continued, her voice rising slightly. Every account, every decision, everything had to go through you. I didn't respond. I let her speak. Because this was the truth behind the manipulation. I came into this family and there was no space for me, she said. No trust, no authority. So you stole it, Ethan said. She turned to him sharply. I took what I needed to build something of my own, she said, and used us to do it, he replied. She didn't answer. Because she didn't need to. It was already clear. The room felt smaller now, heavier. as if the weight of everything that had been hidden was finally settling into place. Mark shifted uncomfortably. Denise looked down at her hands. No one spoke, because there was nothing left to say. The truth had filled every corner of the room. Ethan stood up slowly. His chair scraped against the floor, the sound sharp in the silence. "I trusted you," he said. Melissa's expression softened slightly. "I know," she said. "No," he replied. "You don't." His voice wasn't loud, but it was firm and final. "You didn't just take money," he continued. "You used my name. You made it look like I did this." Her eyes filled with something, panic maybe, or realization. "I would have fixed it," she said again. But this time, no one believed her, because there are only so many times you can repeat a lie before it loses its power, and she had reached that limit. I stepped forward then, not to confront her, not to accuse, but simply to speak. "You didn't just take money," I said quietly. "You tried to take my voice." She looked at me, and for the first time since I had known her, she didn't try to respond, because she knew. She had done more than manipulate numbers. She had tried to rewrite reality, to make me doubt myself, to make others doubt me. And if Robert hadn't found the truth, she might have succeeded. The thought sent a chill through me, because it meant something deeper than betrayal. It meant intention. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, turning away from her. "I don't even know who you are anymore," he said. That was the moment, the real breaking point, not the exposure, not the evidence, but that sentence, because everything Melissa had built had been built on identity, on perception, on control. And now that identity was gone. The room remained silent for a long time after that. No shouting, no dramatic exit, just the slow, heavy realization of what had happened, what had been done, and what could never be undone. Finally, Melissa spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "What happens now?" No one answered immediately, because the answer wasn't simple. It wasn't clean, and it certainly wasn't easy. I looked at her, really looked at her, not as an enemy, not as a villain, but as someone who had made a series of choices, calculated, deliberate, and devastating. "That depends," I said. "On what?" she asked. "On whether you finally tell the truth," I replied. "Not just here, not just now, but completely, fully, without manipulation, without excuse, because that was the only thing left, the only thing that could even begin to repair what had been broken." She lowered her gaze, and for the first time, she didn't argue. She didn't redirect. She didn't defend. She just stood there, silent. And in that silence, everything she had done spoke for itself. Ethan turned away from her completely, walking toward the window, staring out as if he needed distance from everything inside that room. And I realized then, this wasn't the end. Not yet. This was the aftermath, the fallout, the part where the truth settles in and people have to decide what to do with it. And sometimes that part is harder than the truth itself, because now there were no illusions left, only choices and consequences. After everything is exposed, life doesn't go back to normal. That was the first truth I had to accept, because normal had been built on something fragile, something incomplete. And once that foundation cracks, you don't rebuild the same house. You build something new. The days after that confrontation were quiet. Not peaceful quiet, but reflective. Heavy in a different way. Melissa left the house the next morning. No dramatic goodbye, no final argument. Just a suitcase, a few cold words exchanged with Ethan, and then silence. She didn't look at me when she walked out. And I didn't stop her. Because some exits don't need to be forced. They happen because there is nothing left to hold on to. Ethan stayed, but he wasn't the same. Not immediately. He moved through the house like someone learning it for the first time. Slower, more aware, more distant. From everything, from everyone, including me. And I understood why. Because when trust breaks, it doesn't just affect the person who caused it. It affects the person who believed in it. One evening, about a week later, he found me in the study. The same room where everything had started to unravel. He stood in the doorway for a moment before speaking. "Mom!" I looked up, and something in his voice stopped me. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't confused. It was tired. "Can I come in?" he asked. I nodded. Of course. He stepped inside, slowly closing the door behind him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "I should have listened to you." I didn't respond immediately, because this wasn't about being right. It never had been. "It wasn't easy to see," I said gently. He shook his head. "No," he said. "It was. I just didn't want to." That honesty. It mattered, more than any apology, because it meant he understood. Not just what happened, but his part in it. "I trusted her," he continued. "And I thought if things felt stable, then everything must be fine." I nodded slowly. "That's what most people do," I said. He let out a quiet breath. "She used my name," he said. I keep thinking about that. I saw the pain behind his eyes, not just betrayal, but violation. Because identity isn't just paperwork, it's trust, and she had used his. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly. That caught me off guard. "For what I asked." "For not believing you," he replied. "For letting her take over. For letting you stand there alone while she made you look like you didn't know what you were doing." His voice broke slightly at the end, and in that moment, I didn't see my son as a grown man. I saw him as someone who had made a mistake, a painful one, but a human one. "You weren't the one who did this," I said softly. "But I let it happen," he replied. "Yes," I said. I didn't soften that part, because healing doesn't come from pretending. It comes from facing the truth. "But you're here now," I added. "And that matters." He looked at me, really looked at me. "Do you forgive me?" he asked. The question hung between us. Heavy, but not complicated. Because forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about choosing what happens next. "Yes," I said, without hesitation. Because despite everything, he was still my son, and he had come back to the truth. That mattered, more than anything else. He nodded slowly, and for the first time since everything had come apart, I saw something shift in him. Not relief, not completely, but a beginning. "I want to fix things," he said. "You can't fix everything," I replied gently. "I know," he said, "but I can try." That was enough. More than enough. Over the next few weeks, things began to settle. Not perfectly, not quickly, but steadily. Robert helped finalize the financial recovery. Most of the money was traced. Some of it was recovered. Some of it wasn't. And that was another truth I had to accept. Not everything that's taken can be returned. But something else was restored. My name, my credibility, my voice. Because the narrative Melissa had tried to build, the one where I was outdated, confused, incapable, was gone, replaced by truth, by clarity, by evidence, and more importantly, by recognition. People saw me again, not as someone being pushed aside, but as someone who had stood firm when it mattered. One afternoon, Linda sat with me on the porch. "You handled that better than anyone I know. Could have," she said. I smiled slightly. "I didn't feel strong," I admitted. "You don't have to feel strong to be strong," she replied. That stayed with me, because strength porch. "You handled that better than anyone I know?" "Could have," she said. I smiled slightly. "I didn't feel strong," I admitted. "You don't have to feel strong to be strong," she replied. That stayed with me, because strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. It's patience. It's choosing not to break when everything around you is falling apart. And sometimes it's waiting for the truth to catch up. Melissa never came back. And in time, that absence became its own kind of peace. Not because what she did didn't matter, but because it no longer controlled the space, or the people in it. One evening, as the sun was setting, Ethan and I sat in the living room. No tension, no heaviness, just quiet. Real quiet. "I don't think things will ever go back to how they were," he said. I nodded. "They shouldn't," I replied. He looked at me. "Do you think they can be better?" he asked. I thought about it for a moment, about everything that had happened, everything that had been lost, and everything that had been revealed. "Yes," I said, finally, "but only if we build something honest." He nodded, and this time there was no illusion behind it, no blind trust, just understanding. And that was stronger than anything we had before, because truth doesn't just break things. Sometimes it rebuilds them, stronger, clearer, and real. There is something deeply painful about being dismissed, about knowing the truth and watching others doubt you, especially when it comes from your own family. Because betrayal from strangers can hurt. But betrayal from someone inside your home, that cuts deeper. This story is not just about money. It's about voice. It's about identity. And it's about what happens when someone tries to take both from you. Savannah Waverly didn't just lose financial records, she was nearly erased. Her experience, her knowledge, her credibility, all questioned, dismissed, and quietly replaced. And that's something many people, especially older women, can relate to. Being told you're no longer needed, no longer capable, no longer relevant. But here's the truth. Experience is not something that can be deleted. Wisdom is not something that can be replaced. And truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of rising. What saved Savannah wasn't just an accountant. It was her refusal to doubt herself completely. Her decision to hold on to what she knew, even when everything around her tried to convince her otherwise. And that's the message. If something feels wrong, don't ignore it. If your voice is being dismissed, don't silence it. And if the truth is on your side, be patient. Because truth doesn't always win quickly. But when it does, it wins completely. And sometimes justice isn't just about exposing someone else. It's about reclaiming yourself. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever been in a situation where you knew the truth, but no one believed you? Share your experience in the comments. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. It always amazes me how far these stories travel. And if you believe in stories about strength, truth, and second chances, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that remind us who we really are.